It's a real privilege to welcome our speaker today, Leslie Fleming, who is going to share her screen and present on what's on the radar for horticultural therapy and horticulture for health. Leslie leads the Florida Horticulture for Health Network and the Nova Scotia Horticulture for Health Network. She writes an issue related to HT and horticulture for health as an editor-in-chief of Digging In and Cultivation e-publications, as a reviewer and regular contributor to the Journal of Therapeutic Horticulture. So I'm now going to hand over to Leslie and ask her to share her screen and start the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Lorna. Okay, so how does that look?
Great.
Good. Okay, so I guess we're ready to go. First off, I want to say thank you for inviting me to share some insights in the field of horticultural therapy and my personal perspective using the broader Horticulture for Health framework. In this global forum, my presentation also reflects current work in North America, and I am active in both the US and Canada, working with horticultural therapy practitioners in both countries. So this presentation reflects that, and it's titled, as you can see, What's on the Radar for Horticultural Therapy and Horticulture for Health. So, having gathered a fair amount of research about what is happening in horticultural therapy and topics touching on horticulture for health, the point that really has jumped off the page for me is that the world is changing all around us. It's really challenging to keep up with items we need to know. So, this session is presented for health service and green care professionals, landscapers, and in particular, horticultural therapists. The need to know developments that are on the radar, emerging concepts, and activity for me fall into 7 key areas as listed here. And my perspective on this views self-regulation, polyvagal theory, mental health, horticultural therapy, HT, connections, social emotional learning, nutrition, and pandemic gardening as important areas to explore and to become better informed. So first off, let me say that the lens through which this is presented is from the Horticulture for Health framework that I offered a few years ago. And here's the citation. There is a link to this paper on the Florida Horticulture for Health Network website homepage. So let me talk a little bit about the Horticulture for Health framework. It really is a way to look at how horticulture impacts human health using 5 major categories, and they're listed here. Horticultural therapy, short to HT, which I'll be using in this presentation. So HT and health services that use horticulture as an integral part of a therapeutic modality. And then the second category, groups or movements using horticulture as a catalyst for social interactions. Third category, landscapes for health. Then food, nutrition, and food action, which we've grouped together, and horticulture practices. There have been exciting new programs and research and developments emerging from the field of horticultural therapy and the broader horticulture for health. The Florida Horticulture for Health Network, and I'm going to refer to it as the Florida Network because it's a mouthful, and that's the network, one of the networks that I lead, has created a resource hub on its website, and it has more than 3,000 citations and program examples, more research than program examples, and these can be an effective source of information. In gathering data for the Florida Resource Hub collaboratively with other HT practitioners, it has really been exciting to see the amount of literature available. Now, the Florida Network resources are all free, and we are in the process of revising it with 2024 revisions, and we are posting those as we finalize them. And as a matter of fact, I've just done sections on autism, another section on school gardens, and then a third section on child and youth plant-based programming. The Florida Network offers other free resources like webinars, a quarterly e-publication, Cultivate, and for subscribers, we send out a monthly e-blast called Chive Talking. So, what is on the radar and what are the need to know developments in horticultural therapy and horticulture for health? I better cover this because that's the title of this topic. So some of the topics that I'm going to choose and talk about are very academic, and some are very practical developments in the people plant universe. And by the way, I have compiled the citations from this session into a PDF, which will be available through Trellis. First topic, as you can see, is self regulation. It is defined as an individual's processing of sensory, biological, neurological, environmental, and societal inputs to interpret and manage thoughts and behaviors, emotions, and neurological and physiological responses responding to the world around them. The awareness of this in HT practice and theory in North America is limited, but is an important area the profession needs to incorporate into foundational knowledge. And it's important because it involves human functioning for all people and all populations. Now, when individuals have imbalances in self regulation, this dysfunction manifests in so many areas: inappropriate or criminal behavior, relationship issues, or maybe lack of self control or inhibition, and fight or flight response to threats, among other behaviors. This very complex web of inputs involved in self regulation involves multiple biological systems. It involves the brain, emotional intelligence, learned behavior, and social norms that present as an individual's planning and executive functions, their choices, impulses and thoughts, emotions, and overall societal behaviors. Theories on self regulation are numerous, with multiple disciplines providing insight and research on this very expansive, complex topic, including neurology, neuroanatomy, psychophysiology, and psychology. Now, as health professionals, we are working with some individuals with self regulation dysfunction, and that's across populations. So, expanding the horticultural therapy discipline's knowledge base by incorporating knowledge from neuroscience and allied professions is beginning to occur. And just as an aside, thank you, Trellis. This is one of your photos, the lower right photo. So, getting back to self regulation, let me share an example. Self regulation challenges identified with veteran and active military populations are often related to stress, post traumatic stress disorder, and hypervigilance. And these are often associated with difficulty shifting internal distress to external inputs, or modeling calm, measured behavior, or fostering sense of well being, optimizing integration of brain and mind functioning, and sadly addressing suicide ideation. And those are just a few. So, the key points for today: self regulation and challenges to self regulation span all populations, and self regulation has strong neuroscience connections. So, present practice in medical, therapeutic, and mental health fields in Canada and the US cite Porges's polyvagal theory, which uses a framework where the autonomic nervous system's reactive adaptive behavior is based on a predictable hierarchy of three states. Those are connecting, mobilizing, and disconnecting. And there may be different terms used by different academics. And these help to explain an individual's response to internal, external, and nervous system inputs, these functioning below the level of the thinking brain. That latter phrase is something that is used by mental health professionals. So, research has demonstrated that multiple brain regions are involved in interpreting and responding to numerous inputs, which result in behaviors, thoughts, communication. Stephen Porges is considered one of the pioneers in the field of polyvagal theory, as is Deb Dana, and you can see citations for their work on this slide. I'm sharing quite a bit of information, so I think if you're going to do research papers or whatever, you might have to watch the recording and then write some of this information down. But thank you for being interested. So it's important to understand polyvagal theory because many, including HT practitioners and HT theory, have not to date placed as great an emphasis on it and on the neurophysical processes explaining mood, cravings, arousal, emotions, executive function, resisting temptations, or substance abuse. And these are behaviors that HT practice addresses. So, the concept of fight or flight behavior, all know, is much more complex than that simple phrase. And as health professionals, we need to better understand the neurophysiological process, the adaptive defensive behaviors, the autonomic state, and strategies for addressing self regulatory deficits, incorporating these into HT goals and activities and especially outcomes. And one of the expanding focuses of research, led by Porges, is the concept of safety. And that's an individual's feeling of being safe and the importance of feeling safe related to behavior. This certainly impacts self regulation. Now, doesn't this make sense thinking about clients, people who do not feel safe and their behaviors reflect fight or flight or inappropriate responses? By the way, Stephen Porges has several interviews available on YouTube that you may find informative. Now, this very broad topic of self regulation and polyvagal theory are still being investigated across disciplines, and they are beginning to be incorporated into HT to a greater extent than currently exists in North America. Polyvagal informed interventions offer an understanding of human functioning different than most rely on in horticultural therapy, and the HT modality can, for example, introduce and practice adaptive and appropriate social functioning, where, for example, feelings are separated from associative thoughts and behaviors. I hope you will investigate neural connections to self regulation and polyvagal informed strategies more than I can share here. The Journal of Therapeutic Horticulture has published a paper in their 2023 issue that Maureen Bethel, Tasha Roberts, and I wrote on self regulation and horticultural therapy, discussing applications of self regulation interventions in several populations, including corrections, seniors, early childhood, autism, and veteran populations. And as a matter of fact, we just presented a webinar on self regulation and HT that will be available as a YouTube recording on the Florida Network channel. I've listed it on the handout. Directly related to self regulation are increased connections between horticultural therapy and mental health. And what we're seeing is that practitioners from the two fields are crossing over, getting training in both fields and elevating knowledge and practice in these areas. There were at least 10 conference sessions at the 2023 American Horticultural Therapy Association conference addressing or touching on connections between HT and mental health. So, this is an area of growing interest, growing practice, new research, and positive client outcomes. The AHTA conference topics were diverse and interesting and some of them are listed here: therapeutic horticulture as emergency tool and crisis interventions for unaccompanied migrant youth, nature informed mental health, taming the anxious brain, therapeutic gardens for psychiatric seniors. So, quite a number. Now, one of the Florida Network's webinars, and it's the last one listed here, addressing HT and mental health. It is available as a YouTube video, and we just posted on the Florida Network YouTube channel Kirsty Shank's webinar. I think that's the second one listed there. Nature based therapy for domestic abuse recovery. In October of 2023, several new sections were added to the Florida Network's Resource Hub, and this is one of the offerings. And it was under Population and Programs category. And there was a new one on mental health populations, and then another new section on trauma recovery. So please take a look at these available resources, all free. They have a strong focus on mental health HT connections, and I do think that they're interesting and can provide good background, good validation for programs. The Florida Horticulture for Health Network Resource Hub also identifies programs, including those in mental health areas. So let me share a few North American examples of plant-based programs with a mental health focus, including a variety of delivery sites to demonstrate the scope in this area. So the left photo is from Pacific Quest, which is an outdoor behavioral health care program in Hawaii. And it's for treatment of adolescents and young adults struggling with emotional and behavioral difficulties. And they use wilderness therapy, horticultural therapy, and neurodevelopmental approach to treatment. The top right photo is a Vogel Alcove Child Care Center, and that's in Dallas, Texas. And the HT program was developed by Katie Grimes, who's a registered horticultural therapist. And they work with children experiencing homelessness and its related mental health issues using their Look and Listen sensory garden, Share and Care vegetable garden, Bloom and Grow wildlife garden. And these and interventions support strategies addressing hypervigilance, altered sensory integration, chaos, and trauma that the children would be experiencing. And then the bottom right photo is from the Pottle Center. It's a social center with mental health professionals working with adults living with mental health issues or illnesses and addictions. And they use plant programming. And this one is located in St. John's, Newfoundland, and that's in Canada. The research substantiates the mental health horticulture for health connections, and you can see the citations here. Therapeutic garden induces changes in mood and brain activity in depressed adults. And a meta analysis of randomized controlled trials of horticultural therapy on mental health. And then a 2022 systematic review of effects of HT on person. And that one was published in the Occupational Therapy Mental Health Journal. The journals that I'm citing here and in the Florida Network Resource Hub are published not just in North America, although for those of you outside of North America, you probably will see they do tend to be a bit more prevalent, but perhaps you recognize some of the journals. Now, this citation, Garden Counseling Groups and Self-Esteem, a mixed method study with children with emotional and behavioral problems, covers the current topic of mental health connections, and it leads into the next development we need to know about that is on the radar: mental health of kids, with a focus on social emotional learning. An important topic gaining momentum because the mental health of students of all ages continues to be an ongoing health concern due to societal issues like social media, COVID-19 disruptions and mortalities, political vitriol and war, frequency of mass shootings. And here's a statistic: a 29% increase in anxiety and 27% increase in depression diagnoses in US children ages 3 through 17 between 2016 and 2020. Hmm. In an article on this topic that was just published in the Florida ePub Cultivate in the spring 2024 issue, and that's available online, the topic was explored. So let me share a few points now. Strategies for preventative care, supportive services, and alternative interventions are playing a role in mental health services for children and youth. School gardens and services delivered in these nature-based settings are supporting emotional and social health and well-being. And in addition to learning and food literacy, school gardens are and can be platforms for mental health support. School gardens are being examined in relation to social and emotional learning, and the acronym, you can see it on the screen, is SEL. And these are primary elements that are part of mental health. A scoping review by Lohr et al. In the Journal of Adventure Education and Outdoor Learning suggests that school garden programs have the potential to enhance 5 competencies of social emotional learning, including responsible decision making, self and social awareness, relationship skills, and self regulation. Oli et al. Systematic review of school gardening on health and well being from the perspective of the gardening activities also sheds light on the relationship between school gardens and students' well-being. And that was research in 2016. Poland and Retzlaff first identify school gardens as learning, and I like this term, experience space, which along with exposure to nature can influence pro-social and emotional behavior of students. And then the third citation, Bicame et al. 2021, examined the impact of schoolyard greening on social emotional health. Not limited to school gardens, and using the Horticulture for Health framework with its broader lens, we see the research and practices supporting plant based recreation, education, and treatment interventions, along with connections to nature, nature based therapy in plant rich environments at schools and elsewhere to address social and emotional learning. There are now many, many school gardens in North America, and I hope in your countries as well. So, while programs and delivery sites may vary across the globe, I'm suggesting that we can expand services beyond growing edible plants at these types of locations to include more opportunities for social and emotional learning and greater awareness of mental health and well being for children and youth and college students. Now, let's not forget the latter population. In the spring issue of the Nova Scotia Horticulture for Health EPUB called Digging In, one of my articles discusses university and college students' health and well being supported by nature engagement on and off campus, as well as campus gardens. And we're seeing a real growth in these. Some of the innovative plant programs and resources for young people, these identified in the Florida Network's Resource Hub, some with YouTube videos showing what they are about. And here are three examples I'm going to share. The top left photo is a day at Forest School, and it demonstrates outdoor learning and importance of access to nature. Then the bottom left photo is Urban Roots. That's the name of the program. And it's for at-risk youth in North Carolina, United States. And it has a vocational horticultural therapy program partially funded through the Campaign for Black Male Achievement. And then a third different model, which is the right photo, is Hershey School's Sensory Garden. And it engages students with its garden using plant-based programming and trauma-informed therapy. Now, some great resources for plant programming with children, and these are all online and readily accessible. Youth Programming Toolkit. Then the National Garden Clubs, and that's U.S. National Garden Clubs, Children and Youth Programs, and the National Garden and Youth Garden Symposium, again in the U.S., from the American Horticultural Society. So I'm sure that there are many wonderful resources used in other countries. These are several of the links that I wanted to share with you. And again, they're in the PDF handout. Okay, so moving on to pandemic gardening and virtual horticultural therapy. It emerged in 2020 and it continues to be with us. So it has been on the radar for a bit now, but let's consider a few things. One of the positives of COVID has been an uptick in people gardening, typically in their home gardens. And there now exists more research validating the health benefits of gardening, which most of us in this forum knew intuitively. The scope of research topics is broad, as you can see from these selected ones, and they're published in a wide variety of journals. Gardening, pandemic gardening, victory garden models, and we use different terminology here. All of these continue to interest hobbyists and professionals. And as the news reports, COVID is still with us, so we need to continue incorporating these into HT practice and horticulture for health initiatives. And I'll leave this slide up for a minute. One initiative that is now on my radar is the National COVID-19 Outdoor Learning Initiative in the US, and it was begun in 2020. It's interesting because it uses an equity, mental health, economic framework, all important components. And the program supports outdoor learning spaces, many of these at schools, with an emphasis on nature engagement, cost effectiveness, and capacity building. So, again, these are pieces that are essential and effective for sustainability of programs and initiatives. The second recent initiative on my radar related to pandemic gardening is a national schoolyard forest system, again in the US. This initiative seeks to create schoolyard forests to directly shade and protect students from extreme heat related to climate change. And they envision schoolyards with forests, and that includes diverse trees planted in large groves that are climate adapted for areas of all sizes and shapes, which will provide access for students during physical activities, outdoor learning, play, and social gathering. And the students are involved in designing, planting, and stewardship. Now, the relationship to pandemics, I guess I would say better, safer learning environments where group gatherings are possible outside a traditional classroom, plus other environmental benefits. And this really is an adaptation expanded due to pandemics. Virtual delivery of horticultural therapy expanded during the pandemic and is still used by most therapeutic disciplines. It opened some new avenues and opportunities. Virtual delivery of HT has forced the question: what is the importance of in person connections, engagement, and health interventions like horticultural therapy? And I think perhaps it has made us value more in person delivery of therapeutic services while expanding HT toolkits and skills to include virtual and digital platforms. Some of us have been dragged into this with maybe not as much enthusiasm as we have for hands on plant activities. Okay, so moving on to another topic on the radar: nutrition and the call for greater integration into our practices across disciplines. Now, did you know that research in nutrition has investigated using sweet potato flavor, nutrients, and sensory characteristics for frozen desserts? Yes, like ice cream. I'm not sure I would choose this flavor, but research by Kim et al. In 2021 suggests that these types of desserts can provide sensory and nutritional attributes. Who knew? Now, I actually just saw this week a recipe from Farmers Markets of Nova Scotia organization for chocolate sweet potato pudding. And that's on my to do list to make. Now, back to sweet potato. It is the seventh most consumed staple food worldwide, adapting to many growing conditions with a complex starch containing dense caloric counts. China, Malawi, and Tanzania are the largest producers of this food globally, and the US is the eighth largest producer. Sweet potatoes are now being considered, as I'm suggesting, as ingredient for other food products. Most HC practitioners grow some edible plants. So, what is developing within the nutrition and food sectors that we need to know? Nutrition, specifically nutrition provided from plants, impacts all aspects of health and is an important health determinant, impacting brain fatigue, mood, and inflammation. So, this aspect of nutrition and growing edibles is something we do not really talk that much about or factor into North American HT practices. But turning to research, particularly from the emerging field of nutritional cognitive neuroscience, we can be better informed. For example, taste and texture are important components of nutrition, and we're seeing advancements relating to these, like the sweet potato ice cream. And then you see some citations on the screen. Growing vegetables and fruits like watermelon, for example, in HT programs is quite common in North America. Now we can access nutritional information more easily or learn about a model program like Texas Sprouts and their study of the impact of a school based program with gardening, cooking, and nutrition. So I've included nutrition as a topic on the radar because I think this can be a growth area for people with a horticulture for health orientation. And that is the integration of nutrition into programming at a wide range of delivery sites. Now, let me explain a bit of the relevancy to HT and horticulture for health. HT practitioners are working with social agencies and schools and community gardens. So, isn't it important to know about, for example, cultural nutrition foodways, strategies targeting populations with limited access to new good nutrition and food security, and understanding nutrition counseling, therapeutic horticulture, school food programs and school gardens, food RX models, food literacy, and affiliations between hospitals and community gardens for community benefit. This latter is a newer term being used in US hospitals tied to funding for programs. And these are now part of the people plant universe. A 2022 Journal of Therapeutic Horticulture article I co authored with Karen Nelson and Evie Zhang identified 100 U.S. hospitals with some form of horticulture programming, and that was either horticultural therapy, hospital gardens, nutrition led programs, and or affiliated community gardens. Now, table 1 shown here is in the article. And while the specific hospital may not be of great interest to this audience, the models and applications may be. So, can you envision any hospitals in your region being interested in these types of horticulture focused programming? And I say approach them with a proposal. You have this peer reviewed article to cite, and it lists many successful models. Moving on to another related topic with our theme of what's on the radar for HT and horticulture for health is food as medicine movement, another area that offers opportunities. With the recognition of the role food and nutrition can play in health, in North America, I feel HT practitioners are well positioned to deliver programs with this focus. Foundational knowledge on how to grow edible plants, programs for specific populations, and work with hospitals or community gardens. Well, these are all part of horticultural therapy training, and I hope that's the case in your area. This intersection of food and healthcare, including the food is medicine movement, involving specific activities that increase access to food that support health, is relevant to HT practice. Food as medicine models are delivered in multiple ways in Canada and the US, and some were mentioned a few slides ago, but let me share a few more. They include mobile food trucks, produce prescription programs, food bucks coupons, which are redeemable at farmers markets, and some of the trending models I'm seeing, improving hospital foods nutritional value. That's for staff and patients. Some hospitals now have on site food gardens with produce sent to their cafes. And then CSAs, those are community supported agriculture for hospital staff in hospital settings, and one is at the NYU Langone, New York Hospital, as well as Island Hospital in Washington State. So these initiatives rely on experienced people who can grow healthy food and who understand the horticulture for health connections. Oh, isn't that us? I think so. Food and nutrition programming is addressing specific health challenges like diabetes, blood pressure, cancer diagnoses, and they include developments of nutrition guidelines, systematic review of vegetarian diets in children, University of Alabama Birmingham's Harvest for Health program, and it partners cancer survivors with volunteer master gardeners to grow food in home gardens. So there are so many exciting models being delivered for all populations. I've just extracted a few. And perhaps some of these can be replicable models for you. And now on to the final topic on the HT radar, and that is resources. So, this last segment of the presentation helps to summarize the breadth of these topics drawn from the Horticulture for Health framework, suggesting the integration of the topics and current state of horticultural therapy practice and thought. Throughout the presentation, I've tried to provide resources across the topic areas, and the primary one I have used has been the Florida Horticulture for Health Network Resource Hub, from which I've pulled the citations and examples. And then here are two more that cover several of the topics. So the middle one is Therapeutic Horticulture Activities Database, and the acronym is THAD, THAD, and it is now available online with more than 100 therapeutic horticulture activities free. And it uses 9 main activity categories, and we include information on goals and population. So I hope you'll take a look at that. And then the third resource that I've listed here is Kids Gardening website. Its organization hosts interesting online engagement talks on a wide variety of topics related to children, gardening, school gardens, and to me, they're all framed in the horticulture health context. So all of these are accessible by global communities and they are digital resources. So that's a positive. I've compiled, as I said, all the cited research from this presentation into a PDF file drawn from the Florida Networks Resource Hub. And as I mentioned, I've provided this to Trellis for distribution. And the concepts and practices that I've presented here have been evident and validated in practice and current research. Now, while I focused on these in North America, and I'm one voice from this demographic, I think that some of these topics on the radar are relevant to horticultural therapy or health practitioners throughout the world. Our work takes us beyond our primary field to many areas and sectors and related fields where horticulture intersects and support health initiatives. And observing what works in other fields or countries or therapeutic settings can inform us and then elevate the work that we're doing in horticultural therapy and related fields. Taking a broader perspective on these interdisciplinary issues, I think elevates all the areas, including horticultural therapy, nutrition, landscapes for health, social emotional learning, mental health HT connections, and then polyvagal theory and self regulation. Now, as you can see, and I hope I've been effective in this, conveying that many of these topics intersect and they can inform and support one another. I encourage you to explore some of these topics and share your programs and successes with others. I think that's the highest compliment and the easiest, best way for us to learn what is working. We don't always have to reinvent the wheel. And hopefully, some of the ideas have been food for thought. And please do consider actual nutritious food like the sweet potato frozen dessert. And to finish off, here is some contact information, and we will move into questions and answers, and I'll try to answer as best I can. Just going to leave this up for a
Thank
minute.
you. Thanks, Leslie. That was, well, what a lot of information and providing all those resources. We've definitely got a lot to think about. I can see there's questions in the chat, so I'm going to hand over to Joan so that we can get the Q&A started.
I'm just going to say what Jenny has said in the chat here because that sums up what I was thinking. Wow, what a fantastic informative roundup of research and resources. Thank you very much, Leslie, and a big happy smiley face with big stars. So yeah, that was super informative. Amazing. I'm so glad you said at the very beginning, don't try and write anything down. Just watch it back and pause and write down what you need to do then, because there was so much information there. And I think from that research, all the links, Fiona has got a question for us. And Fiona's question is, how do you collate these citations across so many different publications and disciplines? The research base is so crucial to our profession to underpin the case for our practice as well as practice development. But so often studies are published in scattered journals behind a paywall.
Exactly. And that was what prompted the Florida Horticulture for Health Network to do this resource hub. It's a team. We have people with different areas of expertise, and we research and we look across disciplines, across journals, and then we also include program models because not everybody is academically inclined or they don't need that academic focus. So we wanted real life models. And as we were working through this, and I think it began maybe in 2021 when the Florida Network was established, we just, again, practitioners were saying, well, I'm interested and I use aromatherapy. Okay, so then we knew that we had to include nature-based therapies or allied health professions. And then somebody would say, well, I'm really into therapeutic gardens, but I see that I'm a volunteer at a school garden and I'm using a lot of the same theories or practices. So that's how we built it. And, this is a shortcut for practitioners and others who might be interested. So when you go onto the Florida Network website under Resource Hub, you'll see, I think there's 8 categories, and I should know this by heart because I touch this almost daily. You'll see different categories, and then under the 8 categories, we have subsets. So for programs and populations, we have, as I said, a subset on mental health, a subset on trauma recovery. I think there's a subset on eating disorders. And so this is just something that we as a group of HT practitioners have taken on. Many years ago, the American Horticultural Therapy Association had a bibliography and they were unable with their resources to keep it up to date. And so this is just a responsibility and a project that we feel through the Florida network that we can take on. I think for some of you, you may find that the research citations, the journals, maybe aren't as robust from your part of the world. And, we are trying to be sensitive to that. But I do think it's a good resource. So thank you for, possibly exploring it.
Well, I'll definitely be exploring it Monday morning, first thing. I'm on there, so I am. Great. Fiona's also, see, you've stimulated more questions. Fiona saying, thank you, Leslie. This is such a rich resource. We're trying to map the knowledge base for the profession, and your site is at the heart of it, she'd say. She's saying, do you also invite experts to run training or webinars to help your members apply this academic knowledge practically?
Yes, we have a regular slate of webinars, and we do look for people who have experience in the areas that we're talking. I just did a webinar, as I said, on self-regulation with some ladies that were co-authors of the published journal article. The next month, which month are we in? April, we're doing a webinar. I'm not the presenter, on nutrition at community gardens, and the 2 that are presenting there are doing a lot of activity with young people and using nutrition. And this was one of the points in this webinar, nutrition as a health intervention. And I've heard the presentation, or, the gist of it, because it was at the HTA conference as well. And they're using it in different capacities. And I think this is what I'm trying to convey with the Horticulture for Health framework, that we can undertake these initiatives and it can be integrated into nutrition, community inclusiveness, food insecurity, a landscape for health if it's at a community garden or school garden. So these are all interrelated areas. And having been in the horticultural therapy field now for more than a decade, sometimes we had on narrow blinders. And, in discussions with my peers, we would say, well, wait a minute, we just saw this program. It doesn't fit neatly into this category. And so that's how the Horticulture for Health framework evolved. Not just me, it was in consultation with other people as well. So thank you, Susan Morgan.
Thank you. Lindsay has just commented, thank you, Leslie, for sharing such tremendous resources free to all. And I think that is the big thing. You know, we live in a society now where people don't want to share. And it's lovely that even across that pond that we talk about, you're willing to share with us all. It's lovely. She continues with and practice so much. Together we grow. There we go. There's a mantra. Fiona is asking more. Do your webinars and research citations count towards continuous professional development for registered horticultural therapists?
Woo, okay, that's a bit of a political conundrum, certainly in North America with the professional associations. The Florida Network will provide certificates for participating or listening to webinars, and different therapeutic disciplines have different regulations for CEUs. I have done workshops and webinars with official accreditation for CEUs through the American Therapeutic Recreation Association, ATRA. But that involves a lot of paperwork, so we aren't doing that. I mean, we certainly could do, and I have suggested that to other groups. But, you know, if you think that that's something that you want to do, maybe the Florida Network certificate will suffice. You can email me, you know, again, for those of you who have been involved in CEUs, they're fabulous. We like attending the webinars to get that official accreditation. Woo, that's jumping through a few hoops. I hope that's on the horizon, but don't know.
Okay, we'll leave it at that then. To be followed up with. I have a question, Leslie. You know, like the Florida Horticultural Network is really quite young. You only started in 2021, so that's, you know, coming up in 3 years. And you mentioned you co-worked with a few others. How many of how many and who are you? You know, in numbers.
Right. And we would be one of, I'm going to say, at least 8 regional horticultural therapy groups within the United States. The Nova Scotia Horticulture for Health Network is in Canada, but kind of in that same regional HC groups. We started really through a conversation between myself and Lee Deal, and she is a lecturer and runs the University of Florida Certificate in Horticultural Therapy. We had been active in leadership roles in the American Heart Therapy Association. Lee had been the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Therapeutic Horticulture for 15 years. We had been part of a Florida HT Association that sadly closed down through no fault of anyone, just an organizational thing. So she and I were saying, look, we need to connect people. And that was how the idea started. And then between the two of us, because we've been in the field for a while, we started inviting people. So we have an advisory team, and I think we're like 10 strong. And what we've done is tasked different areas to different people. So there's one person who does the webinars, one person who does cultivating. It's not just one person, but leads these areas, one person who does social media. And this is volunteer driven. No one is paid. And we actually set the organization up. And I hope this might be an inspiration for other groups. We don't ask for funding. We don't handle funds. We have been able to do workshops, webinars, e-publications without funding. And that makes it easier for the organization because we don't have audits, whatever. We do, you know, I self-fund the social media platforms, and, you know, I'm happy to do that so I don't have to handle the funds. But I do think that there are a lot of resources out there. We are using an organization that's not Eventbrite. We just recently changed that we do our registrations for our webinars through and we don't pay a fee. So there are lots of services that you can get out there that don't cost money. But we do rely heavily on volunteers. And as you know, some people are interested in doing volunteer tasks. Some people are very focused on their practices and don't have time. And I would say both the Nova Scotia network and the Florida network, I'm very fortunate to work with wonderful people who are willing to share. Again, share free. And that's kind of been the mantra for both networks.
Yeah, super. Well, it's very you're setting a really fabulous example. It's super. Okay, I think that's all the questions in the chat. I'm just going to put everyone onto gallery view so I can see if anyone's got their hands up. Does anybody want to voice their own question to Leslie? Now's your chance. You can put your hand up. Physically put your hand up or put the wee reaction hand up and I'll look for you. No, everybody's, I think your slides, your presentation was so thorough, Leslie. And I was watching some people, you could see the pen scribbling. I thought they didn't listen to the instruction at the beginning, not to write. Super. So if we've got no more questions, Lorna, I'm going to hand back to yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joan.